Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands, the Native and Indigenous people who live and continue to live on the land we gather upon today. These lands were originally inhabited by the Omaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Odo-Missouri, Sante Dakota Sioux, Kansas, Iowa, Cheyenne, and Winnebago people. We take this time to acknowledge the past, present, and future of Indigenous people, to recognize the ever-present systemic inequities stemming directly from past wrongdoings, and strive to commit ourselves indefinitely to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice for all peoples. Today, Omaha Table Talks, OTTs, as we call them, were initially recreated in Omaha in 2003 by the Social Justice Advisory Committee of Catholic Charities Omaha. In 2012, Inclusive Communities acquired OTTs and shifted them into a larger public discussion over comfort food. And so today we are attempting to come back into that in-person and hybrid virtual realm. So I just thank everybody for your grace as we continue to work through some of those new logistics. This year, I should say, we entered a partnership with Echohawk, Lefthand, and Nicole Bangus, co-founders, members of the Native American Community Partnership of Omaha Metro Area, to start the Native and Indigenous themed Table Talk series that we have today. I would like to also thank our OTT sponsors, Lozier Foundation, Cox Communications, and American Family Insurance for helping to support these Omaha Table Talk series. Also, thank you to Pam Duncan and Victoria, who are our two ASL interpreters for today, and our volunteer facilitators. All right. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Echohawk, who will start our panel conversation, and we'll get started.
Thank you. Echohawk Lefthand So I just wanted to say thank you to Inclusive Communities for inviting us and helping us to have these conversations. So thank you to Inclusive Communities. And I just want to have some time here for our panelists to introduce themselves as well. So we'll kind of go across the way here. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Echohawk Lefthand. I said myself in my language, but I come from the Navajo or Dene Nation. And I work here in the Omaha Public Schools, serving Native American students. So happy to be here.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Christina Ellison. I am a Lakota Oglala Sioux. My family is from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. How you say Running Hawk is Champi Yonka. So I am so thankful that all of you are here.
Hi, I'm Jordan Zendejas. I'm from the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska, and I work here at UNO in the College of Public Affairs Community Service in the Emergency Management Disaster Science Department. And I'm Assistant Director of the Tribal Management Emergency Services Department. I'm also an Associate Judge for the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska.
Hello, my name is Grace Johnson. My Lakota name is Wa'ushbe Kiamwi. It means teaching altar woman. I am Ogallala Lakota. I am a dual licensed therapist and drug and alcohol counselor, and I work with Society of Care in Nebraska, and I'm on the executive board for NICWIC, Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Association Coalition.
So thank you in joining us here today, both online and then also a few people here in person. I know that's kind of getting back into in-person types of things. So welcome to everyone. So today our theme is how to celebrate Native and Indigenous cultures without appropriation. Together with the panel, we talked about three different themes. One is about mascots. Secondly, about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And then lastly, preserving and sustaining our native medicines to include sage, cedar, tobacco, and sweetgrass. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get into our first theme. And we've all agreed that our medicines would be the first place to start, kind of not as traumatic, or we'll kind of progress moving forward in that sense. And so to the panelists here, just talking about the importance of our medicines and sustainability, what are your thoughts in regards to, you know, there's a lot of stores out there that sell sage. You know, you can go to pretty much any new age store in Omaha, but then you also look at Kansas City, then you look at Des Moines and Minnesota, and you just think about the quantity of these plants that are not only needing to grow, but also being harvested. So what are your thoughts about the sustainability in that sense?
I will start off on this since I'm holding the microphone. The quantity, for one, is something I think of. But before I do this, in my tribe, we see these medicines as living beings, conscious living beings. We acknowledge them as relatives. And traditionally, we only picked them at certain times. We didn't take any more than we needed. And we made sure when we harvested that they could grow back. So we left behind the seeds, we left behind the roots, and we never took the entire patch of whatever was grown. And people need to probably know that some tribes didn't use sage, some tribes didn't use cedar, some didn't use sweetgrass. It's not a universal thing. We have a wide variety of tribes in the United States. And so that information alone, people are not aware of, that these are for us sacred beings. And for us to see them disappearing and not being able to be found anymore is heartbreaking. Many of these, the process to pick them is another process in and of itself. It's a prayer many times when you pick these sage or sweetgrass or cedar. The hard thing is, I always remind people that prior to 1978, natives themselves could not practice this practice. We ourselves could not burn sage without getting in trouble federally. It was a federal law. So if you imagine today the widespread use of sage and sweetgrass and cedar, we couldn't do that ourselves. And so the use of it has exploded. And I know people appreciate the culture, but sometimes these medicines, for some of them, depending on the tribe, is a protocol on how to pick them, how to use them, what to call them, when to use them. Sometimes in certain tribes, if a woman was on what we call her moon, she didn't use them, or she didn't touch any medicine during that period, during that time. And this is another thing people are not aware of either. So just imagining not being able to use sage today because it's against the law. That was a violation of our religious rights. The other thing is the quantities. I've heard people say you can buy it now at Five Below, at the Five Below store, like a dollar store. Traditionally, we didn't pay for them. We picked them ourselves and we gifted them. And we also, in my tribe, we believed how you picked them, the thoughts you were having was important to have. So it was an intentional process that we held highly important, highly sacred. And for them to be commercialized, I feel that's very disrespectful. I find it very dishonorable. And it's really sad just to see the loss of some of these patches of sage. And I do know, I've heard from people in California that the current sage that is sold widely is called white sage from California. And some of the tribes there don't want that being picked or sold anymore because it's being over harvested and it could easily go extinct. And this is something that is very worrisome for most tribes. And just the quantities is surprising. And I have had discussion with other people that sage was used in other cultures around the world, and yes, it was. But the particular one that is being oversold is the white sage, and that only grows in California. What we have out here is called prairie sage, and that one, even that is being over harvested because it's just being sold everywhere. I'm trying to think of anything else. You guys got anything else you want to share?
Yep. In our conversations, we talked about recommendations or alternative ways to cleanse.
Mhm.
I know that I'm a big avid watcher of Flip or Flop and Christina on there. We know when she goes into the different houses, she says that, oh, there's a bad energy in here. I need to sage this place and stuff like that. And we had talked about some other ways that people could cleanse these areas. And so,
Yes, thank you for saying that, reminding me. I had researched myself. I was like, what did other cultures use to cleanse, right? And I had found that in Europe, in ancient times, I want to say ancient, but older times, centuries ago, they used a variety of different herbs too. They would do lavender bundles along with, what's another flower? I think it was an herb they used, thyme, lavender, and sage, but it was the sage they grew in their garden. They had their own versions of smudge sticks. So it doesn't always have to be, I got to get sage and do this. There's a variety of different ways of cleansing an area. And when I found that out, I thought that was really neat. I'm like, well, see, there's other things that people can do too if they feel the need to go in and cleanse an area, right? Because we don't own the market on that, natives don't, but there are variety of cultures that do manage to do this. And I think in our discussion, we also talked about it was used widely in Greece. There was different versions of sage. I'm trying to think of anything else that you guys want to share. No?
and so there are other medicines that we use. Not only the sage, there's also, the cedar, there's also the sweetgrass, and then there's also tobacco. And one thing about the tobacco is when you say tobacco, you think about cigarette and kind of that industry. And for each of our communities, it wasn't necessarily that tobacco. And so for myself being Navajo, we have these mountains, and there's a certain vegetation on these mountains that you collect. And it's not the tobacco leaf that you kind of see down in the Carolinas. Up in this area, I know that our cultural specialist has told us that it was the willow, the bark of the willow, that you would scrape off and use that as tobacco. And so just to put that out there, that when we Native peoples talk about tobacco, it's not just the commercialized kind of nicotine, kind of that tobacco. It's kind of each indigenous community has their own versions of tobacco.
And to add on to what Grace said, as far as cleansing, they're used at wakes. What we have is wakes. So when we have a death in the family, for our funerals, we do a traditional wake where either it's a 1 night or a 2 night. So when you attend a wake, we cleanse the next day using sage bundles. And so when somebody uses to cleanse their home, it's not the same way where if you attend a wake. And so it is very much a dishonor. And that's what Grace was saying. And you can go to you can go to a mall and walk into a store and just purchase a bundle. So if you have these youngins, teenagers, just walk in and purchase one because it looks cool, it's very much a dishonor to those that have lost a loved one at a wake. So when you all pretty much bundle or, sum up everything that Grace was saying, in the end, it very much is a dishonor to the Native people.
Mm-hmm.
And just in general, all the other topics that we'll talk about, a lot of the things that Native American people do aren't things that we do because we think it's cool or interesting. It's part of our heritage and culture and religion and our spiritual beliefs. And so you're starting to appropriate our beliefs as well. So they're sacred to us and not something that we wear or do because we think they're, and like I said, that they're cool or anything like that. So they have a lot of different meaning behind it. So I think that's kind of the heart of it as well. We appreciate people who respect our culture, but it's also sometimes that people pick and choose what they want to respect about our culture and what they want to advocate for. So, I mean, if everyone wants to do like a cleansing ritual, I'm not going to say you can't do that, but there's a lot of other issues that we'll discuss today that are also really important to us, but people don't want to hear that part. So it's a lot about intention of what you guys want to do with it. If you're not Native, I myself wasn't necessarily raised on the reservation. My grandma, in the few decades ago, there's a relocation program where they took Native Americans off their reservation and sent them into cities. My grandma did that with her sister, and she married a Mexican man. And so I grew up in the city, and actually my aunt recently passed, and she lived on the res. She went back home to our reservation. And so we had our own little ceremonies there for our aunt, and it took 4 days, and they go overnight. I wasn't involved with all of them, but I know there is a lot of taxing. Sage was involved as well, but so I don't know all the cultures and traditions. We had people there who were explaining to us because they knew that there's a lot of city Indians coming up. So luckily we had people there that would also explain it to us. But just how you go about it, your intention is also very important about how you handle all these topics.
Mhm. Kind of a good segue to get into our next theme, but as non-natives start to take things that maybe they seem as beautiful or appropriating or things of that nature, sometimes they change it. And so thinking about our next topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, we've talked about it in terms of, over-sexualizing the women, talking about how did they change the attire to, something you can go onto Google and just, you can find all kinds of images of scantily clad women in headdresses and all of these things. And that leads us to having, the largest number of missing and murdered women in the country. And so with that, kind of your thoughts on missing and murdered Indigenous women and regalia and things of that nature.
Okay. So really, when you think of missing, murder, Indigenous women, we need to go back and look at the first missing and murder Indigenous woman, and that is Pocahontas. A lot of times when we at least know that word Pocahontas because she's a Disney princess. At least that's what mainstream has done. Disney has, just like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. She has been glorified, but actually she's exploited, and she wasn't a woman, she was a girl. When she was a girl, she was the daughter of a chief in the Potawatomi tribe. She was kidnapped, taken to Jamestown, and there she was raped and impregnated. At the time, they were pretty much told that she was going to be returned, but she was traded for a copper kettle. Long story short, she was taken across to England. There she was taken around and civilized as kind of a piece. They were over there trying to civilize the natives. And we know how that story goes when across into boarding schools, assimilation. But there they Christianed her and changed her identity into Rebecca. How John Smith comes into play over there. She confided into John Smith. She was traumatized, depression, and they were, she was going to come back. She wanted to come back to her family, and ate dinner, vomited, and died. So that's obviously poisoned. Her tribe wants the remains to this day for reparations, and whereabouts are unknown, of course. That's the true story. That's the original story. And she was the first missing murder Indigenous woman. Obviously, 86% of trauma has happened within over the years of missing murder Indigenous women. That is what we need to know. That is the appropriate story, but we don't. And but just like Echo said, that we need to stop over sexualizing Native women. But that's what little girls are seeing, 5, 6. I want to watch Pocahontas, the little raccoon friend, the hummingbird one, but it's not. And it's unfortunate that over the years that trauma has ran through all of these women, these girls, and sometimes you will see missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It is not an epidemic, it's a crisis that's happening. So those movies need to be pulled. It doesn't need to be, it needs to be pulled and stopped showing.
I don't want to pull too much into mascots, but like you said, you can over sexualizing of Native women. Obviously, there's costumes people put out. There's sorority parties where you can be Pocahontas. I just think it's really interesting because they make it look like Native Americans run around in scantily clad leather all the time. But if you look at our regalia, you're basically covered head to toe. You have shirts, vests, cover up your legs, your feet, men, women, both of us covered head to toe, and we still dance outside in the humidity. So, so the fact that people think that we're scantily clad all the time is just kind of an interesting take on how people perceive Native American women. Obviously, this is more of a topic that people are more concerned about because obviously in the more recent news, there was a woman who went missing and she got national coverage. And of course, that's sad and no one wants to take away from that. But of course, there are thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women that no one are hearing about. And there's a lot of factors, including that, whether it be laws, the nature of reservations, how sometimes, a lot of the times they're more remote. Like I said, there's laws, and I'm careful with when I'm saying this because I also don't want the states to think they can infringe on tribal sovereignty. But there are gaps in the law, and I know there's laws out there trying to correct that, but it's still not enough. Where if you are a non-native man and you assault a native woman, the state doesn't have the right to go there. It's the tribe. And sometimes tribes only have as much as a year to punish someone to do that. Or it's a federal offense, but the feds aren't going to come in for every domestic violence issue. Like I said, I work for the Winnebago tribe, and I also have family members who work for the Omaha tribal court and the Ponca tribal court. We like to say taking care of most of the tribes here in Nebraska. But yeah, so there are laws out there, and we don't want the state to infringe upon our sovereignty or anything like that. But it's hard. And I know recently, as far as 2020, because we were doing Zoom court at the time. And yeah, we came upon a case about a missing murdered Indigenous woman. And more recently, they were indicted and charged and came to a conclusion in the federal courts here in Nebraska. But I don't think it was a little blip in the news. Definitely not as big as national coverage as you saw with other people.
Yeah, the person she was talking about was Gabby Pito. It was a manhunt, and in the process of that, they found how many more bodies? Like 9. Searching for her, they had found 9 other bodies of people who had gone missing. So it just shines a light on the disparities there, right? The other thing I want to bring, in addition to what they've said, it's a complex issue because we are sovereign nations, and sometimes the courts can deal with the tribe, the county, then the state, and then the federal level. So it can be all these different overlapping jurisdictions, like she had said. But the other thing I want to remind people of is that there is such a huge misconception of Native women in general. Most people only know us as the Disney princess Pocahontas, right? But they don't understand the cultural aspect. Prior to colonization, prior to Europeans arriving here, many of the tribes had women in political, spiritual leadership positions. So the role of women in general was seen very, very differently than a European view. Women were seen as sacred. We were life givers. We were the doorway that the Creator chose to bring spirits into this world, bring babies into this world. So that role in and of itself was sacred and honored. And to have women in positions of power, leadership roles, when Europeans arrived here, it was surprising, shocking for them. And it wasn't something they were accustomed to, because they'd always seen women as property of men, according to a Christian perspective. So when you add to that, even our Constitution is modeled after portions of it, or a lot of it was modeled after the Iroquois Constitution. It was almost very word for word. The only thing they left out was women. The Iroquois Constitution included women into their positions of leadership and having the rights as men do. So that was just erased. Native women have been just erased from history in general, across the board. Women did sit in on treaty negotiations between the tribes and the federal government, but when federal representatives left the tribes and they wrote down who was there, they left the women out of those, the recordings. So this epidemic that is happening, it extended from the get-go, from whenever the beginning of this country has been going on. The over-sexualization, exploitation of women, it started out very, very early. There is accounts of Europeans when they first arrived here, raping Native women. The tribes were upset, and the Europeans that came here were kind of surprised on why they were so upset, because they didn't understand the tribal culture, that women held a different place, a higher place, wanted more of equality. So Native women did hold political power, spiritual power, and economic power, because in many of our tribes, most of the property was held in the women. They owned almost all property. And I can speak that for my tribe, our Lakota tribe. The women owned everything in the teepee. And if she didn't want her man there, she could toss everything out and he had to leave. And that was it. I kind of like that, but not the same today, quite. So I'm like, take note, somebody. Please, it's being recorded, right? But the view of Native women from the get-go just was placed very low, unfortunately. And it just hasn't changed until now, until we're talking about it. But it is such an epidemic that we have such a high rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women in proportion to our population. It would be, any other group would have an uproar. There would be protests on the street if they knew their women was going this missing and murdered at this rate, and nobody cared, and very little investigations. So. Yeah.
They get watered and shoot little bullets at you. I think rubber bullets, but still not paying.
Yeah.
How much time do we have?
Oh, we got 5 minutes. And that kind of leads us into this last topic. And, I think we're here just trying to provide some awareness. We also want to, look forward to, if there's really a conversation around missing, murdered Indigenous women, or the uses of sage or mascots, which is also a very, very important issue. When you look at our sports teams and you look at the representation that we have, we were having a conversation just before our panel today about the mascot down in Bellevue, and how there was a community representative who said, well, this is why Native people should have it, is because we're honoring you, which is basically saying that this non-Native person is telling us how we should be honored. And so in that regards, what are your thoughts on mascots?
Well, yeah, obviously, in emergency management, there are good donations, there are bad donations, and obviously, you want to ask people what they really want, not what you think they need, because if you give them what you think they need and they can't use it, obviously it goes to waste. People's time, energy, money, resources go to waste there. And it's kind of the same thing for Native Americans mascots. I mean, not everyone agree, not every Native American agrees that they are offensive, but when you say, like, we're honoring you, well, what we'd rather have honored is our treaties. We don't necessarily need a caricature of what they think a Native American looks like, and then have other teams say, kill them, destroy them, then start to use like scalping motions. And anyway, so I mean, people we already know are not their best at sporting events. You say things that, you hopefully wouldn't say anywhere else, like kill them, push them down. Anyway, but yeah, but yet you do that to our mascots. And like I said, my dad actually wrote a book. And he teaches a mascot class on campus or used to. Anyway, so we've talked a lot about this in our home growing up. And if you just look at all the different mascots, the history behind it, even though the Seminoles, for example, gave their permission, the Indian that's their mascot has nothing to do with their actual tribe. If you look at a traditional Seminole regalia and what a man looks like, they wore dresses that kind of resembled like a serape look. They lived in the swamps of Florida, so they didn't really have horses. They were in canoes. So the fact that a guy who wears a Plains Indians outfit and rides a horse and shoots bow and arrows or whatever has nothing to do with the Seminole tribe other than their name. So if you're actually going to try and honor us, maybe you should at least learn a little bit about the tribe that you're trying to honor, because there are over 570, I can't remember the exact number anymore, but there are, I want to say 576 tribes within the United States. We're all completely different. Even though we are Plains tribes, we have different ways that we celebrate death and honor people, and our languages are different, our clothes are different. So the fact that you're just trying to lump us all into a Plains look is disrespectful. And like I said, they don't really tell anything about the tribe itself. You don't actually learn anything about Native American tribes when you have a mascot. I mean, I guess there's a lot of things I can say. I know you're short on time, and I know the other two want to talk.
I guess really the essential question is, if we created a team, would you do it now? Would you name the team now Chiefs? Would you name the team now Redskins, Braves? No, you wouldn't. And the argument would be, well, no, of course it's been brought to our attention. No, that's completely untrue. You wouldn't do it now. So change it. There's getting the misconstrued view of a child that's not what I look like. No, because that's not what you look like. Even the word chief, right, that's completely false. So we should not be fighting at all. In Bellevue East, yes, that's been a continuous fight, the chieftains. No matter what you do, even if you change it, there's always going to be somebody mocking that. So the mascot issue, it's going to be a continuous issue, but it's also, we're fighting it, and we are making a fight, and we are paving a way and winning. So we just need to continue using our voice, and we need to continue showing Native children and white children of every color. We need to show them that that's not what a Native looks like at all, because that's not what we look like. We all look different. We're all beautiful. We're strong individuals.
And I think we're going to close out, but I just wanted to thank everybody for coming here. There's a lot of conversations kind of stemming about, I think some of the root causes is capitalism, genocide, fight for the land. And that's a whole nother conversation, of reasons why the women were tied to the land. So you get rid of the women or you kind of breed them out. Then it's like the land is up for grabs, things like that. And so there's a lot of different conversations we can have. But these are kind of the three that we wanted to start today. And in your groups, I guess that we're going to go to right now, if you want to have a dig deeper into a certain conversation, just let us know. And then we'll just talk about that.
Yeah,
Soon.
thank you, Echo. So we're going to take this moment to go into those group conversations. For those of you in the space, I think if we can just combine the two tables and have one group, that'd be great. I know Colin's gonna put us, for those virtually in Zoom, you all into some breakout rooms. Before we do that, just a reminder of a few agreements that we like to hold in these breakout rooms. And that is one speaker, one mic, so proper turn taking as we are discussing and having these conversations. Vegas twist is what we call our kind of our confidentiality agreement. Stories stay, the personal stories that we may decide to share with each other here in these spaces, they should stay, but the lessons that we can learn from those stories should leave. Making space and taking space. If you are a person who likes to talk a lot, acknowledge that and make that space for others to take as well, so that we can hear everybody's voice. Keeping that open mind and being respectful to other thoughts. So as we go into these breakout rooms, we'll be in these conversations for about 20 minutes, and then we'll share out, we'll come back to the main room and share out amongst each other what were some of those couple of themes that we all discussed.
Cultures and how, for the sake of the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That was great. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some great conversations in your breakout rooms. Let's start with Colin, maybe you can help me out here. Some of the rooms. So who would like to share out maybe one or two themes or conversations that you were talking about from the group that Holly was moderating?
So, hey guys, this is Holly. If, unless somebody else wants to jump in, I can share from my group. So we talked about some of our ahas around sage and the cultural meaning behind that. And some of the individuals shared that they wanted to make some changes in how they handle that conversation with their friends. We also talked about the true story of Pocahontas and how that was new to some of us and very sad. And from a more uplifting standpoint, there were ahas around the roles that women hold within tribes and native cultures. So that was something that some of our participants actually wanted to share with their daughters to kind of contrast that whole Pocahontas story and with Disney. So going forward, our group wanted to be more intentional about learning more about missing women, missing Native women and Indigenous women. And one of our group members even mentioned being associated with a group that publishes data and statistics, and she's going to try to get more data on the number of missing women in Nebraska who are Native or Indigenous, and hopefully help with that education of others.
Great. Yeah. Go for it.
Hi, this is Christina. Can you hear me?
I can.
I am the American Indian Alaskan Native representative for NSCA. I am a teacher. So I am also on the caucus for American Indian Alaskan Native. We met this summer in June. We wrote up actually a rationale and submitted it in, I believe it was July, to NEA to actually work with Operation Underground Railroad, which is a human trafficking organization, to get more data on that as well. So hopefully that's something, if she wants to touch base too with NSCA, Jenny Benson, also to kind of see where that is at, because it is long overdue. The last one was published, I believe, in 2017. So we're hoping to definitely get that to go through, which I do foresee that happening. Because like I had said, it definitely is an epidemic over time, but now getting to a crisis. So we do foresee that going through. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad that we're making connections so that we can help others become more aware. Who would like to share out some of the topics and themes that you all talked about? So this group would have been moderated by Rachel. Our group 2.
Let's see, I'll hand it over to Angela. She was our note taker in our group.
Awesome. Angela, you are on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Some of the same conversations were had in our group, but we talked a lot about the missing rates and the murder rates, and just the new information that we received there. And we also talked a lot about the purchasing of sage and sweetgrass, and what the impact that has, and how that's not, when you purchase it, you don't know the intentions that were done when it was grown, or if all the, sorry, I'm reading my notes. But just, what we learned from that was fascinating. And so much of this is just so new to me. And so I had questioned our group about, how do I find more information, or how do I learn a little bit more about this? And because in our culture, sometimes so much of what we learn is what we see on TV. And I know there's so much that's done so poorly out there. And so I asked for people to point me in the direction of some things that would be helpful, or that I could direct others that I know to. And so a couple recommendations were the movie Reservation Dogs, and also to look on Criterion for some more information, and a show called Smoke Signals also, I think, was another one that was mentioned. So if anybody else has more to recommend, I'd appreciate that. And we also discussed the sexualization of Indigenous women, and just how that theme is reoccurring in other communities and other cultures and populations, and just how that impacts all women. I don't know if Rachel has anything to add to that.
You did awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, and so I'm going to make a note here. We do have an information sheet, a data sheet that the panelists helped refer us to some information, and that we have some research on, that we'll be sending out in an email to everybody who participated. And if there's ever more resources that you'd like to make sure is on there or shared, we can share that out. Echo? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say there's also, I just saw the thing about the newsletter, but
Yes.
online, I can kind of point you in the right direction sometimes, but I don't know if people can hear me. I was just trying to point out another resource, Indian Country Today. It's an online website, but it can kind of point you in the right direction in terms of trying to find accurate and kind of more authentic material as well. And so that was just indiancountry.com, I think, right? Yep. And Indians.com with a Z. And so there's all kinds of different conversations about even what we would prefer to call ourselves. I think ultimately what tribe we're from. Indians is kind of a word that is kind of used in some cases, okay, some cases not, just because a lot of scientific literature refers us to American Indians, but Native Americans, indigenous peoples. I myself say that we are all indigenous, because no matter who you are, you're all from somewhere. So you're indigenous either to Europe or to Africa or to India or to the Asian kind of community. But I also wanted to, just one last thing, just about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. One of the biggest things in regards to rates is that we as Native peoples are sometimes not counted accurately. And that kind of goes back to being enrolled in a specific nation. I know that my program that I manage in Omaha Public Schools, I think if you look at our American Indian rate, I think it says we have like 2,000 Native Americans or something like that in the district, but that's all self-identify. And then when we try to go through those records and say, you have to have a tribal enrollment number, then that dwindles down to about 730 that we have in the district. And so a tribal enrollment number is another thing that's also a hot topic within a lot of Native communities, because it's blood quantum, meaning that you have to have a certain percentage of Native American descendancy or heritage. A lot of tribes are going towards a thing called descendancy, to where you have to just prove that you're related to somebody within the tribe. And so that kind of leads to a lot of inaccuracies when you're looking at rates for Native people. Sometimes it's a lot higher. Similar to suicide, some people go into the hospitals, they say they're accidents, but really sometimes they're trying to intentionally harm themselves. It's just a lot of coding and different things like that. So I just also wanted to bring that up. I know that we're very short on time, so I'll turn it over to Jordan.
I was just going to say, if you want something with media and Native American representation, there is a movie out there. I don't know if it was put in I didn't think of it till just now. Reel Engine. So it's REEL, like a movie reel. And it just goes over the history of how Indians are portrayed in media. And it might ruin your childhood, Bugs Bunny, things like that. But it's out there and it's really informative.
Awesome. I think we have.
Quick,
Go ahead.
sorry. Also with media, if you have Netflix too, and a music person, there is a documentary called Rumble, RUMBLE, and it actually talks about the roots of Indigenous music and where that is founded. I stumbled upon that one. That one's really good as well.
Awesome. I love it.
Hello. Okay, real quick. The word Indian, I just wanted, because Echo talked about it. It's a legal term that some tribes have to use because the treaties put it in as Indian, and this was done hundreds of years ago. But today people like to identify as the tribal name, or sometimes they say Indigenous, or they'll say Native American. I would suggest ask your Native friends what they want to be identified as or called.
Awesome. So we had another virtual breakout group that was led by Nikki. Who would like to share out from that group?
I can do the share out from that one. First, thank you for all of these resources. This was definitely a question that we had in our group, was just how do we continue to educate ourselves? Where do we even begin? You don't know what you don't know. So I really appreciate all of you giving these resources. And also, just for anyone that doesn't know, I am actually the one who will be sending out that resource page and that follow-up email. So I will make sure and include all of these links along with some other resources as well. So we'll make sure to get all of these ones that were mentioned today in that data sheet. But some of the things that were talked about in our group, again, just the surprise of the sage and the sweetgrass. We just were not aware of that, kind of that casual usage by many people, and we just did not understand or know what it really meant or what it means for Native and Indigenous cultures. And we talked about the importance of taking more of the role of listener and amplifying Native and Indigenous voices in whatever spaces we can, because we just don't know so much and we want to learn, and the importance of amplifying those voices. We also talked about Pocahontas and kind of how like it was meaningful, like the Disney Princess Pocahontas, because for so many girls it was the first like brown Disney princess, but then also how like sad that story was so just told so wrong. And so like what like the importance of accurate representation, it is so meaningful to so many people, but what is the point if the story that's being told is so just incorrect? And then we talked about, again, just kind of the idea of like, how do we take responsibility for our own education and not always placing the burden on, whether it's Native and Indigenous cultures or any marginalized group, just the importance of us continuing to take on our own education. And then also on maybe a happier role, as I believe somebody mentioned previously, really enjoyed or appreciated learning about the role that Native women hold in their cultures. And just that was new information, but it was really positive information to learn. We really liked that. I think that was it. If anyone from my group wants to add anything, feel free if I missed anything.
No, I was just going to add about going back to the educational piece, because I mentioned in the group how it does get just annoying, always feeling like you have to educate folks. So it's big. So it's important for anybody to educate themselves and to take it beyond being an ally, because allyship is easy. Anybody could wear a t-shirt, anybody could do this and do that, and it has to go beyond that. It has to go different levels, and it shouldn't be ally. You need to be an accomplice. You need to be a co-conspirator. You need to be be able to ride with somebody. So when we talked about that, it's important not just to be an ally. It has to go deeper than that, because it requires some sort of sacrifice.
Just a comment about Pocahontas and a statement that, yes, she was the first brown Disney princess, but also to understand that that's tokenism that Disney did. That, yes, check mark, we just made ourselves a brown Disney princess, that's something we had to do. So that actually, yes, they did glorify her, but they also did a form of tokenism, which we weren't aware of what that term was at that time. So they almost did two wrongs there.
I'd like to add to both of the conversations that were just said, that just so to put it out there, I learned about white people's history. I learned about their religion. I was raised Catholic. I'm not anymore. I returned to my tribe ceremonies. I learned their language. I learned their customs. I know American customs. I know American go through one year. I know Thanksgiving. I know New Year's. I know all of the cultural aspects of white America. It's not a lot to ask that other people can learn ours too, our history. Learn more about what happened to Native peoples, because our history is not pretty. And be prepared. You're gonna hear some really ugly stories, but they have to be learned, they have to be taught, and they have to be spoken about. That's the beginning of some form of reconciliation. People need to learn what historical trauma is and what colonization is. It's real. And if you want to be more than an ally, this is where it starts. We will begin to feel like you understand us more than just burning sage. You will feel like you guys are trying to know more, be more, and do better. So I learned everything about American culture. I think anybody, rest of America, can learn about the other cultures that are present and have been present from the beginning of this culture, this country, because it wasn't just natives that were here. There were African Americans here. There were people from Latin America here. There were Muslims here. Asians came in too. People from China, all of them. They're all present, and they need to be acknowledged that they have always been here too.
I would just like to say, like, I knew I volunteered to do this. No one forced me. But also I was kind of dreading coming here for a little bit, because it can be very exhausting and you have to explain yourself. So for example, during mascots and Halloween costumes during Halloween, sometimes people put out things like, please don't wear my culture's clothing as a costume. And then people want to start fights, and they ask questions as though they want to learn, but then, they really don't. They just want to get approval from someone saying, yes, I can wear this fringe bustier and not feel bad about it and not no one I don't want anyone to think I'm racist. I'm like, well, then don't do racist things. But I mean, I know that when we talk about this is great. Obviously it's not going to solve everything, but I'm grateful that the comments here have been more of understanding and actually wanting to learn rather than wanting us to say it's okay for you to keep doing what you're doing. So I'm grateful for the people who are here, who are learning and taking things away and possibly changing. So it makes the conversation less draining to have to relive trauma. And yeah, so I just appreciate everyone out here who's here to learn and not just be a token.
Jordan's comment kind of reminded me of, as we kind of live in this meme culture, there was a meme that was, I think it was a Native person that put it out there. It says, if you want to dress up as my cousin, then I'm going to follow you home and sleep on your couch and eat your food. So better be careful. But also I just wanted to, another resource that's out there is that there's a website, We Are Native, the letter R and then native.com or org, one of the two. And that's geared more for Native youth, for them to access and kind of, there's like an Ask Auntie spot, kind of like a Dear Abby that they used to have in the newspapers a long time ago. Kind of tells me my age, but yeah. It's a really good website talking about emotional, mental, physical, spiritual wellness for Native peoples. And so it's a good resource if you work with Indigenous populations. And I just wanted to put that out there too.
Hello? Feel like I'm monopolizing the microphone. But there was one other thing I wanted to add, and Echo reminded me of it, the mascot issue. It is they did a study on it to find out how does it affect Native youth, and it's a negative effect on their mental health. They've asked youth about those mascots and what they feel like, and they said it makes us feel like we're not real. We're part of history. It brings down our self-esteem, and people don't know us, makes us feel like we don't exist. And so it's the mascots aren't, if those are trying to honor us, they're not doing it. They're actually creating more harm for the youth. I know some youth are like, well, it's the only way they know we exist. I'm like, no, oh, that's sad if that's the only way they know we exist. There's others information out there. And I just want to share real quick. My son was in 7th grade and they asked him to raise their hand if there was any natives in the room, and he did. And for the rest of that school year in 7th grade, kids kept coming up to him and saying, are you really Native? Are you real? You guys still exist? It got to the point where he was like, I wish I'd never said anything. And he was only 7th grade. And I'm like, boy, they weren't doing a good job at that time of, I think the teacher was trying to do a good job. She was attempting to like raise awareness that there's still natives here, but she didn't do follow through. And he graduated this year. So that was probably a good 5-6 years ago. But I always remember that. And I'm going, oh, that's just something to think about.
Well, we are at time. I want to thank Echo and our panelists for being here and having this conversation with us and creating more awareness for us as well. Colin or Nikki is going to post in the chat the link to our evaluation survey. I have the ones here for us in person. Just invite you to please fill those out. We like to learn more of how we can get better at this, and also just wanted to say thank you to everybody for putting up with some of the struggles on technology today. We are getting better, and this is our only second time doing hybrid, so we will increase. Yes, Echo.
And then just last thing, just to kind of close this out, if there's any topic that you would like to have more information on, whether that's MMIW, a part of the NACPOMA or that very long, Native American Community Partnership of the Omaha metro area, we're looking to try to have more of these types of conversations hybrid, just to increase awareness. So if you want to put that in the chat or tell Dominique, feel free.
That is also a question on the evaluation that we added those questions on here. So feel free to put those in, and we'd love to hear back from you. So thank you for joining us today. Our next table talk will be in October as we start our next season. So look for our information on our webpage or newsletter. and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.